Also, before we start, sorry if this this sound effect makes anyone need to leave. That's quite okay. You're very welcome to leave and come back again. That's it, just gone 5 past. Rita, do you want to kick us off then?
Yeah, of course. Welcome everyone to Architecture Fringe 2021 New Spatial Realities. And this is our first event. So I'll talk a little bit about the project. New Spatial Realities is a project we've been doing for a few years now with Fringe. Under a new typologies program where we commission work and ask people to explore various typologies. In 2017, we had the teams reimagining the civic infrastructure and reinterpreting existing building types. In 2018, we had a project called Frankentypes, which explored the hybrid building typologies. And in 2019, we had Retypes, where we invited the contributors to consider the adaptive reuse of redundant building types in the light of the societal change and the climate emergency. So this year, as part of the core program for Architecture Fringe, the New Spatial Realities is a research and design project which invites participants to view the existing urban fabric from their own perspective and to pursue a line of research and interrogation that responds to their own experiences of our shared spaces. We asked the participants, in light of the pandemic and the Architecture Fringe provocation of unlearning, to explore how we identify and define space. How does the space express social negotiations, ownership, access, community, aesthetics, and materials? And the only difference this year is we didn't give a brief to any of the commissioned projects, and we wanted all the participants to come back to us with their brief. The project is still ongoing, but we have 4 participating teams. Civic Soup, whose project we're going to look at today, titled Get Wet, and Civic Soup will talk more about themselves and their work in a bit. In the next week, we're also going to have another 3 teams. So Numa Studio and Callum Duncan will host a talk about Lost in Play. Numa Studio is an interdisciplinary collective of architects and creatives based in London, and as founded on diversity, Numa's work focuses on creating accessible, people-led spaces through collaborative co-creation. Numa are creating a zine that they're going to launch in the event, and they're exploring the collective-led storytelling, and they're trying to capture a screenshot of creative discourse in their studio. The Lost in Play zine will be kind of presented during their talk next Tuesday. Next team is Migrants Bureau, who are going to be exploring food landscapes in Bristol. They're going to look into kind of how food informs social circumstances, geography, and culture, and how that impacts people's experiences of urban spaces. And Migrants Bureau themselves is a social design and urbanism practice working for and with disenfranchised and migrant communities in UK. And a final team will be Raising the Roof and Voices of Experience with their project Households, the Unruly Book. Adele Patrick, Sue John, and Janice Parker, otherwise known as Raising the Roof, and Voices of Experience, otherwise known as Suzanne Ewing, Jude Barber, and Nicola McLaughlin, will be exploring the topic of households, which draws from personal reflections of living and aging. And it's inspired by Raising the Roof's aspirations to construct an alternative to what is available in the current political landscape of housing and social care. So I will post all the event links and next talks in the chat, so you can go and visit the site. I'd like you to also visit our New Spatial Realities website, where Civic Soup and other teams have put together their projects. And also, I'd like you to enjoy the other events. Follow us on social media. And finally, just want to thank all the sponsors and supporters who are making this happen. You can support Architecture Fringe by looking at our program, attending events, but also you can check out our Patreon page. And I'm going to now kind of give the microphone to Civic Soup, and let's get started.
Cool. Thank you, Rita. I think we wanted to start by just saying a massive thank you to the Architecture Fringe, who have been a massive support system for us as fledgling practitioners over the last don't know, 5, 6 years. I was thinking about it, and actually in some way or another we've contributed to every fringe there's been, so it's very close to our heart. So we're very excited to be doing this project for you. Yeah, so big thank you to Rita, who's been coordinating this, and Andy and Neil, who's been doing the work on the website, and also just the wider team, because we love the Architecture Fringe. So yeah, that's a gushing thanks. So yeah, we're Civic Soup. Civic Soup is a collective of architectural designers and artists formed in Edinburgh and active in Scotland and across Europe. Engaging with diverse communities, our work aims to generate interest in and facilitate action throughout our built environment. In the past, our work has taken the forms of participatory workshops, public artworks, and more temporary pieces, and more recently, works like reading circles and this project for the Architecture Fringe, where we're unlearning previous working practices and testing new things. So today we'll be testing the waters for Get Wet, which is our new Spatial Realities piece of work. So yeah, if I start, in an immersive digital space, we'll pull localized perspectives on access to water and its sociocultural, ecological, and economic and corporeal dimensions. We invite you to dive into bodies of water we miss, bodies which divide, bodies with emergent communities, bodies we want to explore, ebbing, eroding, resonant, buoyant, disappearing. So over the course of the festival, as Rita said, there'll be new puddles appearing on their website, which is the platform you can access through the Archie Fringe's main website, and also on our website. Where the spaces we'll be showing you today will be available for you to click into and explore for yourselves at your own pace. They work as a piece of research and embedded knowledge, and as you'll see today, there's different layers of information that we've been looking to incorporate in them. We're really mindful of everyone's time, and we're thankful for you to join us today in this lunchtime. So we've got strict videos of 5 minutes each of the 6 of us as we talk through our spaces. And then at the end, or as we're talking, if you have any questions, you can pop them in the chat and I'll be fielding them and then feeding them back into our team. Also, if you want a question, where you've got a question for us, we're very happy for you to pop up and ask with your real life face or just a floating voice. Either thing's good with us. So yeah, I'm going to kick us off in our first space, which is, well, initially my bathroom, but then we'll be going to Wardy Bay in North Edinburgh. So this scripted journey through my bathroom, then away to the beach, is a confluence of personal experience, reflections on community users, and 2 key texts, Hydrofeminism by Astrid and Neymanis and Waterlog by Roger Deacon. You can find these on those 2 links inside the Matterport space. We are all bodies of water. So begins Neymanis's essay. I feel my most water-like when immersed. Immersion helps us tune into our internal tides, wash away worries, and dissolve time. Immersion reminds us that we have watery bodies. Roger Deacon points to the curious fact that if you were to put a swimming human into a water tunnel, the hydrodynamic lines would coincide precisely with the lines drawn by the patterns of our body hairs. We are well adapted to get wet. So Wardy Bay. Wardy Bay is a small sandy strip beside Granton Harbour, lying between Trinity Mansions and Monolith Naughty's new build blocks. 18 months ago, I joined the Legions, making regular use of it as an urban bathing spot. Swimming at Wardy presents moments of subversion, sublime immersion, scrapes with sewage, and a bustling social infrastructure. As a place, it's cherished, yet spatially and politically fraught. The beach swim has potential to be a more inclusive spatial gesture, as it sidesteps the latent politics of changing spaces. All body stands as a shivering mass of fat, muscle, and bone. Neymanis points to the liminality of the water's edge, our intertidal changing zone, where disparate systems meet. She tells us we must learn to be at home in the quivering tension of the in-between. No other home is available. Changing can be a perilous endeavour. Deacon attributes this to the awkwardness of the continuing confusion of British people about bodies. Until cumbersome bathing machines were invented in the 19th century, to go for a swim was to go naked. This lack of formal spatial provision has been a barrier for beach users campaigning for Wardy's recognition as a bathing spot. SEPA do not currently test the water at Wardy. Walking down the beach, you're as likely to slip up on a knot of baby wipes released by city storm outlets after heavy rain as you are seaweed. I have the best time swimming at Wardy so long as my mouth stays firmly shut. In a recent contestation of council ruling, Karen Bates, volunteer organiser of Wardy Bay Beach Watch, stated, "The community works so hard to look after Wardy Beach. It receives marine litter and sewage-related debris on every tide. We don't believe we should be penalised for lack of existing infrastructure and protection from these harms. Large numbers of people come to Wardy Bay anyway, because of the semi-wild nature of this place, not despite it. We don't want the unintended consequence that Wardy Bay loses its special character and precious wildlife because of a perceived need to develop it." I recently heard about the Gardy Loo, a vessel charged with ferrying raw sewage from Leith further into the Forth. It operated between 1978 and 1998. The legacy of the Gardy Loo is a society who still use the sea as a dumping ground. All bodies of water which contain sewage effluent, however well treated, will contain E. coli and coliforms or worse. Swimming in a near urban water is not without risk, and until the waters are tested, we'll be left guessing what we are swimming in. Deacon reminds us, as with many mildly dangerous sports, there is safety in numbers, but there is also strength in numbers if your right to bathe in this or that particular mud hole is at all questioned. Collective work towards caretaking and bathing off our coasts has bound together a highly active and passionate community. The Wardy Bay Facebook groups provide a digital realm for useful and regular updates on campaigns, seal or dolphin sightings, found items, notes on tides, and much, much more. I like this sentiment from Naimanis. As watery, we experience ourselves less as isolated entities and more as oceanic eddies. There are countless studies proving the physiological benefits of wild water bathing. My feeling resonates with Deacon on this. Natural water has always held the magical power to cure, somehow or another. It transmits its own self-regenerating powers to the swimmer. I can dive in with a long face and what feels like a terminal case of depression and come out a whistling idiot. The swim at Wardy commences and closes with an act of immersion, 2 rounds of delicious thermal shock. Lives spent wrapped up in centrally heated spaces have dulled our ability to enjoy both ends of the spectrum of hot and cold. A regular swim and a slow rewarming has stretched my own limits of thermal comfort. Wild swimming at Wardy has exploded in popularity through the pandemic, and it's basically mainstream. Swimming at Wardy presents moments of subversion, sublime immersion, scrapes with sewage, and a bustling social infrastructure. As a place, it's cherished yet spatially and politically fraught. So that's my piece done. Next, we're going to go to Nieuwe Meer, which is a space in Amsterdam, and Billy Morgan, our Billy, is going to tell us about that now.
Thank you, Laura, and for your reading. Yeah, so I kind of approached this space as like a rumination on the spatiosexual qualities of water. And there's a constellation of like quite different links in there, but in particular, I was drawn to like writing and thinking about Nieuwe Meer, which is a lake in the southwest of Amsterdam that also has one of the only like formally recognized cruising zones in the city. So I'll just read from my text on that now. Nieuwe Meer is a lake on the southwestern fringe of Amsterdam. In the 1950s, sand extraction from the lake bed was used to underpin the post-war construction of Amsterdam's western garden cities. Nieuwe Meer's northern shore, the Park de Overlanden, is a tangle of twisting paths, sandy humps matted with low vegetation and stunted trees. A pink shaded area on a map marks the bounds of the overlanding cruising ground, the sole officially signposted such zone in Amsterdam. Like most Amsterdam parks, the Overlanden is also a wet place, an overspill zone for the levees and dikes that protect the Western Netherlands, including the city of Amsterdam, which lies at 2 meters below sea level, from being inundated by the North Sea. Even in summer, the ground is regularly muddy underfoot, and the air thick with the scent of sweet swamp flowers, birdsong, and the whine of mosquitoes. Copses of trees which one week might afford shelter will have their roots flooded the next, their low-set branches opening upwards like hands, mirrored in the still black waters that stew beneath them, littered with yellow leaves. Inside is a game. Nude picnickers frolic on the clearings in the grass. Cyclists trundle along to sit and wait at a favored lookout, and the interested and disinterested play hide and seek. Screens of vegetation dampen the bluntness of rejection, providing both parties an easy way out. It's a place you really have to want to discover, a place that always asks you to walk in a little further than you'd like, a place that can't be summarized in one sweeping look, that doesn't afford any panoramic views, that can only be known by entering its tangle of relations, desire, and crossed wires. Early evening, I swim at the lake's edge. Hanging my wet towel from my handlebars, I wheel into the gloomy paths, amused by the sight of a white t-shirt here and there amongst the bushes, taking the long way home. That's all. I guess we'll... I'm not sure who's next in the running order.
That's okay, I can tell us. Yeah, so next we're going to visit Callan, who's talking about Riversdale, which is a flood defence in Roseburn in Edinburgh.
Yeah, so I've been focusing on these new flood defences that were put in place around a suburb in Edinburgh called Riversdale, which I've been wandering along a lot during lockdown. Around about 2/3 downstream of the Water of Leith, rising from its source at Colzium Springs, fed by burns draining slopes of the Pentland Hills, and releasing at the mouth of Leith Docks. The water flows, turns a corner, slides glossy by young shrubs, smatterings of long grass, weeds, wildflowers, and staked trees, too young or not yet at home enough to stand alone. Riversdale is a small middle-class suburb of Edinburgh, and much like every other. Detached stone 1930s bungalows and huddled 2-floor terraces address wide patchworked tarmac, cambering smooth and deep to pavements lined by hedgerow, flower beds, second cars, conspicuous flat-roofed extensions, and shallow front gardens of various keeping. Drifting over low rooftops and between delineated curtilages, the steady hum of tyre and engine carried from northern and western edges, and routine passing trains are gentle reminders of a more urgent world out with. At this turn in the river, at Riversdale, 2 low-slung concrete bridges rise moderately to span water and embankment. Underneath are spaces just short enough to make you crouch. Not a space made to access, but occupiable nonetheless. At least while the water remains low, that is. Some scale the undersides, practicing their grip by either side of hollow concrete sections that offer just enough purchase for a strong hand to cling from. Some gather to take shelter from weather, and some briefly from view. Some smoke, some tag these surfaces, and some watch birds. To the eastern flank of Baird Drive and the south of Riversdale Road and Crescent, Houses and conservatories open to leafy back gardens, bound at their bottom edge by a gap. Drawing a medial line between high picket fences and water that streams parallel below, a brick-clad barrier, still stark in its relative luster to the surrounding fabric, represents a new embattlement for prolonged aspirational stability in adjacent homes and the desiccation of a way of life. As Richard Powers notes in his novel, The Overstory, as of course it's not the world that needs saving, only the thing that people call by the same name. Though charting a relatively unchanged course through time, it would be a mistake to understand this boundary as anything so clear as one between the natural world and the human environment. Of course, this river has known work before, its waters channeled to power mills and cool foundries. Beveled disturbances in this day's steady current of opaque orange-brown sedimented water gently divulge a bed of more complex material accretions. Silt, stones, river weeds, deluge from upstream, piping, reinforcements, and faceted planes of concrete. For the most part, the water here is flat, shallow, quiet, slow. A nestling spot for swans, ducks, and a feeding ground for an apparently sole grey heron. But these waters are known to burst their banks. Several times over the past 100 years, the waters have risen over the embankments, walls and bridges, into streets, driveways, and carpeted living rooms. Prompted by flooding in April 2000, with water swelling to a depth of over 3 meters from their beds, the highest on record, the City of Edinburgh Council have since commissioned and constructed extensive flood defences along this length of the river. As part of wider flood prevention strategies at play further downstream in the city centre, these walls, bridges and embankments and floodgates now lie ready to deny increasingly wet threats to property. The river now flows between two conditions, one of protection, the other sacrificial, a space of transitory commons accommodating fluctuations in the waterline. Perhaps this river and its parallel infrastructure is best understood not as a boundary between two material worlds, but an ecotone. As Astrid Naemis in her essay Hydrofeminism explains, as transition areas between two adjacent but different ecosystems, ecotones appear as gradual shifts and abrupt demarcations. Now, a year into this pandemic, I've crossed these bridges, traced barriers, and walked these banks surely hundreds of times, helping to find ever-shifting routes amongst trodden long grass and the intermittently cracked, sodden, liquid earth at the water's edge. The physical and material realities of our world are shifting. Fluid spatial realities of a future encroach on the spatial symbols of lifestyles that contribute to the water's creep up and outward. The future is wet, or at least wet here.
Thanks, Cal. Next, we're going to visit Seafield Sewage Works, or the edge of, with Siggy.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm going to talk about Seafield a wee bit and also compare and contrast with the Machers of South Uist, which is the work that I was doing last year in my Masters. We live in an ever-shrinking world, a world where the seas increasingly encroach on the land we value so much. You're currently standing in my bathroom in Marchmont, Edinburgh, but I ask you to think outside of these walls and follow the water from and to its source. My fascination with coastal erosion was born in the Machers of South Uist, which is perhaps the most extreme version of coastal erosion in Scotland, for there it may bring about the death of a rare culture and way of life. Coastlines are a fluid thing, much like their maker. They change every day and bit by bit morph into unrecognisable versions of themselves. Rising sea levels and increased storms are changing our world, and we are fighting it regardless of its futility and justness. This bathroom will reference two parallel while contrasting conditions, Edinburgh Seafield Water Treatment Works and the Machers of South Uist. As we increasingly defend our coastlines from erosion, we ask, when did we begin to stop the sea? When did we even contemplate it as a possibility? The Macher, an ecosystem unique to the Western Isles of Scotland and the west coast of Ireland, is a barrier, a buffer against, and a gentle embrace of Atlantic waves. But the Macher is finite and fragile. The dunes that protect it move, and coastal erosion and sea level rise, hastened by climate change, has left this territory under threat. As the Machers push back, the land which gives its community meaning and sustenance is reclaimed by the sea. To hold the sea edge here is to obstruct the processes that create the very ground it aims to protect. However, to leave exposed is to accept its eventual disappearance. Eventually, all that will remain will be South Uist, easterly mountains, and a series of small islands. How might Uist rethink the boundary between land and sea? Seafield is a water treatment work for Edinburgh. It is located on the shores of Leith and is protected by a large seawall. On either side of the plant, the beaches have rolled past it and are now held by further seawalls. Once the shore may have resembled those of Uist. In fact, these shores were known as the Leith Sands, now long gone, replaced by concrete. Edinburgh's leading water work underthread by the very element it processes. The irony is palpable. Upon moving from this bathroom to Seafield, you will have followed the water flowing through the drain. Seafield lies in an area of contention, an area which is projected to disappear due to rising sea levels. As the sea encroaches on Leith, leaving its famous links as a new shore, Seafield might become an island floating in the Forth, protected from all angles. How might Edinburgh rethink the boundaries between land and sea? I cycle down to Seafield and begin scanning its seaward edge. Its sea wall is already huge, and the high tide mark rests at its centre. The Leith Links feels like another world, secluded, yet here I stand on a barricade fighting nature. In 2005, there was a storm that caused South Uist to lose up to 5 metres of land. Since then, locals have attempted to hold the dune edge in various areas, and with a variety of methods, from reinforced seawall to the laying of nets on the dune. To protect it seems normal at first, but it's only when one looks at the ancient villages of North Boisdale that you realise locals have been retreating for millennia. Is this the next, if not accelerated stage of retreat, or are we so emboldened that we might fight? Projections suggest that Edinburgh's new shoreline will sit at the links within our children's lifetime. Here the fight has already begun, with most of Edinburgh's coastline already reinforced. The waters will most likely never meet the links, but it will not be because of our reversal of trends, but because we will build ourselves into a hold, with ever-increasing protection from the sea. This will, of course, ruin our coastline and affect the nearby unprotected shores exponentially. Paradoxically, it is this emboldened human state that has caused these issues, for we no longer live with the earth, but dominate it. Reducing our carbon output and building huge sea walls around our capital do not seem to go hand in hand, but it's a decision that will have to be made. Should we therefore allow the flood to happen and live with the consequences, or should we continue on the path that has brought us here? We cannot undervalue that people's homes and places of work should be saved in some way or another, but the question of how will always have consequences. Coastal erosion is not only an issue with direct and devastating consequences, but it's also a test of our values. Coastal erosion presents us with a paradox of our own making, a paradox which cannot be overcome without devastating effects. Where, though, shall we choose for these devastations to take place? If history tells us anything, it is that it is not me in my Marchmont bathroom that will suffer, but those most vulnerable. On South Uist and Edinburgh alike, it is not only the coast that will erode, but much more. Are we so emboldened that we can change this new spatial reality?
Ooh, thank you. Next, we're going to visit Walthamstow wetlands with Cameron, I think.
Hello. I might make a small break from this beautiful poetry we've had so far, I'm afraid. I'm talking to you from London, where the tap water is considerably less tasty than in Scotland. But I'm going to talk to you about a wet space fairly near my house. But first of all, yesterday I had a really nice salad. with some rocket I grew from seed at home, a little bit of lettuce from my veg box, and a cucumber I bought from my local greengrocer, fresh and fruity. It was really, really nice. It's kind of finally that time of year when you can eat lunch outdoors in the sun. And when it's nice and warm, there's nothing better to eat than a salad. Sadly, about 20 hours later, the inevitable happened. The salad which brought me so much joy was no longer of use to me. I made my way to the bathroom where I sat down on the loo and scrolled through Instagram for a little bit. I'm lucky to be able to rely on a constant supply of water, thanks to Thames Water, who my flatmates and I pay about £370 to a year. Where does this water come from? It joins me in my bathroom after spending some time in Coppermill Lane Works. Here, water from the River Lee is deposited in a number of reservoirs before being treated for human consumption and toilet flushing. Strangely, the water is equally clean for both. At Coppermill Works, the water is first treated by what they call rapid gravity filtration. So it's poured onto a bed of sand, basically. And it takes about 15 minutes to go through it. They then add some ozone to it, which is supposed to kill stuff. And then it spends several weeks passing through some more sand really slowly. And then it's squeezed through a giant sieve and sent my way. But before that happens, it hangs out in these reservoirs for some time. So as I wash my hands, I think about my lockdown runs around here, around these wetlands. They're this kind of beautiful place where plant and animal life is now fully encouraged. And it really feels like they're exploding with life, maybe to my untrained eye. You know, there's full of geese in this image here. I've been picking some elderflower from there in recent days. I actually took an aquatic plant home from one of the channels around here, and I put it in my pond in my garden. It's since exploded in size, and it's become a happy environment for the newts who live there. So I've spent many a morning clearing duckweed from the surface of this pond, fascinated by how some plants from the wetlands were oxygenating it and making it cleaner, while the duckweed in the pond was covering it up and killing the life inside it. I water my garden, including the rocket that I had in my salad, using a combination of tap water, sorry to the permaculture gurus, and rainwater. The cucumber I ate was grown only about 10 kilometers away in the Upper Lee Valley, where they produce 80 million cucumbers every year. Apparently it's most of the cucumbers in Britain are from here. So they're grown on this fertile floodplain with water coming from the same source as the water that's in my bathroom, the Lee River. I know you can also clean water with plants. Thames Water do actually do this elsewhere. And on a Thursday, I work at a place called Eroding, which is a community site which explores principles around the circular economy. So the grey water from the sink at Roban goes through a plant bed. So it's got water mint, some willow, and some of the same plants that I put in my pond. Cucumber somehow is also some kind of water filtration system. It's quite an interesting parallel. It's also interesting to think about the relationship between the Lee Valley as a place of industry, a place that was kind of inhabited in the Victorian era to build lots and lots of stuff on this floodplain, because it was a fantastic means of transporting stuff, but also this new valley as a nature reserve in the middle of the city, a place of leisure. 2 days ago, I went swimming in the Western Reservoir, a paid-for pseudo-natural experience in one of the other reservoirs in this network. Thames Water, who supply the water, is majority owned by a Canadian pension fund. How have we created a world where the supply of water, a human right, is an enormously profitable operation? The water in my toilet was once rain and then river. Sure, it does need a bit of treating before we use it, and someone has to pay for that, but blimey, why is there a Canadian pension fund involved? Random. The original sewage system in London was built by a municipal body, which is publicly accountable, and it's much celebrated today, this sewage system. You know, it's still in operation, something like 150 years later. So I wonder how these models of investment to do with pension funds can allow for real long-term thinking about the construction of, you know, in the way that the construction of the London sewer was able to. Sure, a pension does last a while, but maybe we need to think a little bit more long-term if we want to deal with this kind of insane use of resource. 500 million litres of water a day pass through the Coppermill Works. So yeah, a series of thoughts and reflections, and it's fascinating to be living on the edge of this landscape, this strange landscape which has gone from river and floodplain to industrial powerhouse and back again, kind of. I'll hand back over to you guys.
Thanks, Cameron. Cool. And then our final wet space we're going to look at is in Craigmillar. the Niddry Burn, which we're going to be shown around by Ruth.
Hello. So yes, I'm going to take you first to my bathroom, where a slightly fragmented digital version of myself is sat, thankfully not engaging in the activities Cameron alluded to, and then onwards to a section of Niddry Burn, which runs to the west of Hunters Hall Park in Craigmillar. Niddry Burn is a section of stream in southeast Edinburgh, historically running past the now demolished 16th century Niddry Marshall House on what was then the Washop estate. The Niddry Burn was culverted in the 1950s to allow for the construction of the Niddry Marshall housing scheme. In 2011, the £11 million Niddry Burn restoration project saw 1.8 kilometres of the Niddry Burn realigned to form a river corridor within Hunters Hall Park. The rerouting demanded the destruction of all but the last foot of Gulliver the Gentle Giant, a 30-metre long concrete sculpture commissioned in the 1970s by the Craigmillar Festival, designed by artist and former...
Sorry, I'm going to interject, Ruth, just because you're being drowned out by our...
I was just going to say when I got to the end of that paragraph that the sound is gone.
Yeah,
was it audible at all?
Almost. Maybe Callum can turn down the soundscape behind you.
Right.
We'll try again.
Shall I carry on or start again?
Start again, please.
Okay. Niddry Burn is a section of stream in southeast Edinburgh, historically running past the now demolished 16th century Niddry Marshall House on what was then the Washop estate. The Niddry Burn was culverted in the 1950s to allow for the construction of the Niddry Marshall housing scheme. In 2011, the £11 million Niddry Burn restoration project saw 1.8 kilometres of the Niddry Burn realigned to form a river corridor within Hunters Hall Park. The rerouting demanded the destruction of all but the left foot of Gulliver the Gentle Giant, a 30-metre long concrete sculpture commissioned in the 1970s by the Craigmillar Festival Society and designed by artist and former gangster Jimmy Boyle while serving a sentence in Barlinnie Prison. My fascination with Gulliver's 5-metre long left foot began somewhat by chance. Last year, through a watery study of Edinburgh's public parks, pools and pooling, during the first semester of my MArch design studio, I Googled, who was Jack Kane? Intrigued by the bunker-like sports centre in Craigmillar's Hunters Hall Park, to which he gives his name, a quick scan of his Wikipedia informed me he was a politician, social campaigner, and Edinburgh's first Labour Lord Provost in the 1970s. This page also contained a brief reference to his role in helping a group of mothers at Peffermill Primary School found the Craigmillar Festival Society. Given my own and Civic Soup's interest in communities taking ownership of their built environment, I'm rather ashamed to say I had never heard of this pioneering organisation. The story goes that when local mother Helen Crummy heard music tuition was on offer for children at schools in more affluent areas of the city, she asked the headmaster of Peffermill Primary for violin lessons for her son. She was firmly told that the school had enough trouble teaching Craigmillar children the 3 Rs and that music would not be on the curriculum. In response, she joined the School Mothers Club, and in 1964, the first Craigmillar Festival took place with the intention of showcasing local talent. The Craigmillar Festival Society grew and grew, and in 1976 received a £106,000 annual grant from the European Economic Communities Poverty Programme. By this point, over half the local population were involved in the 2-week-long summer programme events, and year-round, the CFS employed a team of neighbourhood workers who led 57 projects alongside an incredible 500 volunteers. As Helen Crummy so excellently summarises in her book, Let the People Sing, Craigmillar was now suffering all the social ills of 20th century urban living, but sadder still, society at large was now blaming the residents for their plight, not the environment their city had given them to live in. It was through the arts that the CFS changed its environment. They utilised community arts, most frequently performance, as a catalyst for community development. Shortly prior to its demolition, artist Boyle wrote that the Gulliver sculpture was a symbol of that particular period when disadvantaged communities were, for the first time, demanding to be heard. A lack of maintenance by the council led to the sculpture becoming vandalised and dilapidated, and its removal to facilitate the restoration of the burn was part of Edinburgh Council's wider revised Craigmillar urban design framework. This multi-million-pound regeneration plan includes 3,200 new homes, 2 new primary schools, and a redeveloped town centre. As I dived deeper into the history of the Festival Society, it was only through Google Maps inspection that I discovered the fuzzy outline of what could possibly be the partial remains of the Gulliver. I cycled over to see, and there on a strip of land, separated from the park by Nidri Burn and the Nidri Marshall Housing Estate by a tall fence, I found the left foot. Shortly after this trip, as I questioned why the symbol of the Craigmillar Festival Society and the organisation's impact are not more widely recognised and celebrated, I came across Craigmillar Now, who were asking the very same. Formed in 2019, one of Craigmillar Now's first projects is to work with the community to create a locally led, publicly accessible archive in Craigmillar, and then use this archive to inform subsequent community projects. As improvement plans continue in the area, there is much to be unlearned from previous top-down approaches, but creative, collective, and caring community history also exists, with oceans of insight to draw on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for showing us your big foot, Ruth. So that's the end of the spaces and our walkthroughs of them. We've now got about 10 more minutes probably of people's lunchtime, where we're very happy to take any questions or comments from the audience. Equally, I'm going to bounce some points of provocation to the Civic Soup team in the meantime. I also want to pick up on a comment that came in the chat from Andrew Campbell, who says, when we worked on a project with Riverness flood defence wall in Inverness, there are local residents dead against the new wall, even though they got flooded every year. The disconnect with the river and its bed was perceived a bigger loss than the flood damage they dealt with annually, which is interesting, I would say. If there's a question off the back of that, we'd love it. If not, I'm going to ask Civic Soup to maybe talk about Matterport and how these spaces have come about. And yeah, I don't know who wants to jump in.
Yeah, I don't mind. Siggy could perhaps talk about the LiDAR scanner, but more generally, some of you, if you have rented a new flat or bought a new property in the last year, might have experienced Matterport, as it has become very popular for showing flats when we weren't able to visit them. But you can do it just on your phone on the app, and we've utilised it here to show off our spaces.
And Siggy, do you want to talk about the LiDAR scanner?
Yeah, the main method we used was this crazy expensive camera that we were able to rent called a LiDAR scanner, which allowed us to like really accurately stitch together all these outdoor spaces, which was quite a fun experience. I was kind of in charge of cycling around Edinburgh with 20 grand's worth of camera on my back and take it to all these places. Yeah, and then just a fascinating thing where you have to like lots of images of me sprinting away from the camera and like be out of shot. But yeah, that's about it really.
And does anyone want to talk about the watery theme, like how we came to it?
I think the theme kind of quite naturally came up when we had the provocation, because a lot of us had kind of been exploring watery themes for the last wee while, and it was quite a nice kind of convergence of recent research. So as Ruth was saying, for her master's, she was looking at Nidri Burn, and for mine, I was looking at South Uist, and Laura had just joined. She started sea swimming a lot and that sort of thing, and how the sea in lockdown had actually become like a really well-used public space, I suppose, and a lot of people were gathering at the edges of land to kind of have that freedom.
I'm wondering if someone can speak to the theme and the provocation that the Architecture Fringe has given us in unlearning, and then this specific project, which is about new spatial realities. If I'm going to catch anyone out, I am happy to talk about that too, though. What have we unlearned? And what have we learned?
I think there's a interesting, well, I guess it's a relationship that's evolving, or an attitude to water that's evolved through time, through ideas of sort of cleanliness, but also in at the larger scale in terms of environments and how water is perceived as a threat in these environments, and particularly in perhaps Siggy and I's, the spaces that we were focusing on. There are these sort of developments towards defense, the sort of holding back of what really seems sort of a unmovable force. It seems, as I think Siggy said in his writing, that yeah, doesn't seem feasible to sort of hold these spaces back. At what point did we think that became a sort of reasonable thing to work towards?
Yeah, I think for me, it's kind of like this attitude of the best form of defense is like attack. So the convention now is to hold these, for especially with is to kind of like we're very rigid in the way that we construct spaces, and actually in a time where all these spaces are not rigid, they're going to disappear pretty soon. So how can you bear that in mind while also spending millions of pounds on building projects and stuff like that? Is I think an interesting thing that I was trying to tackle, especially like the last year. So yeah, kind of unlearning or like relearning, I suppose, the fluidity that communities like moved in for as well.
It made me think of, I watched a programme about the new nuclear power plant at, is it Hinkley Point in Suffolk? And there was a really long shot of the engineer of the big seawall standing next to the wall being like, it's really big, look at this big wall that we built. And my thought being, how long will that last as a flood defence for future? I think maybe I'm going to chip in on unlearning as a provocation in new spatial realities, and a point about how we were keen to test ways of working digitally, but also as a group of 6 who worked collaboratively and collectively in the past, it's been about testing fluid working methodologies and an ebb and flow, and also this way of representing parallel streams. So parallel and parallel plurality, that's what we'll call it. Yeah, so that's my thoughts on that. Don't know if there's anything else anyone wants to add. Ruth has already mentioned that the spaces that we've built in Matterport are going live on the Architecture Fringe website currently, and some of them are going to be evolving still over the last few weeks, as with the other new spatial reality points. Has anyone else got any questions? No? Any burning desire to say any more about wet spaces?
I have a question. I think coming from working with you on the project for the I don't know, past couple of months when we started talking about it. So it's kind of interesting how a lot of interest into wet spaces around the city came from this kind of lockdown and pandemic sort of life, where all of a sudden we're looking for these spaces. It gives us a bit of more freedom where you're not enclosed within the city. For yourselves, sort of like, so I know Ruth kind of did her master's on the kind of particular locations, but for everyone else, was that kind of escape point as well? Kind of the seafront, the kind of the wet spaces, was that just looking for relief from the kind of working in the pandemic and being stuck in your house?
Yeah, I would say so. Swimming outside also, that was like one of the first things we spoke about, and I think that was a way into speaking about like wetness as a quality of space, was that a few of us had been like open water swimming, I guess. I've also just moved to the Netherlands, which is like one of the wettest countries, and it also kind of manages water in a very particular way, and a lot of the land is reclaimed. So I think any walks I do here, like, you're always reminded about that there are all these like channels that are dug to kind of manage and generally like lower the water level and prevent like flood risk. So in that way, it's very, very present, I would say. But
yeah, I think from all the locations we looked at, the ones in Edinburgh are sort of the ones that still need probably more work for people to turn around and notice them. So there's a bit of a difference between how people in Netherlands sort of appreciate the space, like the bodies of water. And here we have a bit of a disconnect. So it'll be interesting to see, now that people are interested again, how that's going to grow and how that's going to change. I don't know if we have any more questions for Civic Soup from the audience. Andrew Campbell.
Not... Whoa. You're very welcome to jump in and unmute yourself if you want to.
Sorry, there's a massive grass cutter just happening outside my window. So, it's coming around my strimmer now. So. No, it's Rachel, was somebody I worked with at Newcastle University, and she does, I don't know if you know about her, but I just put the link up to her thing in the chat. Mm-hmm. She does a lot about architecture with coast species and watery environments as well, and be really interesting. I think some of the stuff she's looking at would definitely chime with the stuff that you guys have been doing here. And I guess my question was just about that. I can't remember which presentation it was, which talked about the cucumber as a sort of water filter, and then another that maybe touched on kind of other species. I wondered if you envisage, the question is, do you envisage a future working with watery spaces that encourages cohabitation of human and non-human, and is that something that, in terms of the making of spaces, that you guys are interested in? And the most conventional architectural research is about quite kind of human and contained spaces like baths or spas. And what was probably the most interesting thing for me about what we've seen today is that those spaces are, most people probably wouldn't call them spaces, because they're, most normal people, not like architects or landscape architects, because they're so open and so kind of fluid as well. So but more the question is more about human and non-human.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point. I think also in terms of the recognizing these places as spaces, when we were using the Matterport scanners in these outdoor spaces, it's not set up to do that. It's set up to be a real estate tool, and much prefers being inside a room. So we were pushing that to use it as a way to record these spaces. Maybe if one of the others wants to, maybe Cameron, who seems to be on top of the human, non-human aspects, his cucumbers and his salads and his water weeds.
I mean, I don't think I've got anything very insightful to add, but I think it's fascinating to just, I don't know, I got basically over lockdown, I got really obsessed with this pond in my garden, and was fascinated with trying to water it. And basically you can't use tap water in it because it's got chlorine in it, which kills all the plants. So I had to wait for a rainy day, and we had a long period and there was no rain. So I got completely obsessed with trying to look after the life in this thing. But I guess it's fascinating to just think about maybe more passive ways of managing, the stuff that we create, the waste that we make. And I think that's my kind of zone of interest within all of this is kind of waste and management and treatment using more natural processes. But I don't know if you could ever extract water from a cucumber or use it as a filter any more than it already is. But I guess it's maybe looking to, or encouraging, I don't know, I mentioned it because I think it's nice to encourage people to look to what already happens, what's already kind of bioengineered, before trying to invent something really clever to deal with stuff.
One, just to talk about the kind of like non-human aspect, mainly the bit that I cut out of my wee essay for this purpose kind of spoke a wee bit about that, especially in the context of the Macher, which was like been my obsession for the past year, which is basically of two makers. It's kind of like elemental and human. So the Macher doesn't exist without human intervention or animal intervention, and animals like wouldn't congregate there in the way that they do if it weren't for the crafting techniques. So that's like a place where bird life and cows, for example, and cattle, which, you know, on the Highlands is mainly sheep, but they keep a lot of cattle in South US because they poach the land, which is essentially their hooves make wee ditches, and the birds come and nest within them. And these are spaces that don't necessarily at first glance seem to be watery because you're on land, but the Macher is a really interesting kind of example of land and water kind of being one thing. And you get this interesting thing where it's so sandy, the land, that it kind of filters the water in the way that Cameron was speaking about as a technique for drinking water. But yeah, there's a real like codependence of human and non-human and elemental on that in that space. And that's what makes it so rare, I suppose, and so under threat.
We're past past now. I'm going to touch on a couple of points from Suzanne that maybe people can take away as thoughts for the days, if that's okay with Suzanne, who says, or she can read them out herself if she's here still.
Hello, sorry, I've joined late as well, but thanks so much. It's been brilliant. And just to say, a couple of points, I suppose, are just, the question was about re-entering through the bathrooms, which I think is a lovely device. How has that made you think differently about how we think about water invading in or being different in terms of how hidden it is in our design spaces? And I suppose I was trying to get my head around what's the mismatch between the sort of the universality, the scalelessness of water, which is, you know, it's same in our tap in the bathroom, and it's the same when we're in, you know, the kind of amazing wetlands or not there in Nidri Burn. But then our actions are so often circumscribed by scale. You know, the architect does the room or the property, there's the building scale, then there's the infrastructure scale of the sort of sea walls. And I'm just really interested in how that might be rethought. Over to you guys. But I mean, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Those are nice publications to take away or tease over as well. I know you're a neighbour of Wardy Bay. I hope you've been in the water.
Not enough, Laura. I'm now feeling impelled.
Good. Yeah, so maybe we'll wrap up and just say thank you again to the Architecture Fringe and everyone who's joined us this lunchtime. And if it's not cheeky, we can shout out again the other projects that are happening as part of the new Spatial Realities. Rita's put the links in the chat. And then also a wee shout out to the Archi Schools project, which Ruth and I have helped with in the past. And they'll be releasing podcasts which are interviewing young people and practitioners in the built environment, and they're reviewing different events at the Fringe. Yeah.
Thanks everyone. I just wanted to say thanks for Civic Soup as well. This is really great. I just wanted to say that this conversation will eventually find its way onto YouTube and the website, so you'll be able to watch it and share it with everyone you know, to have an exploration of wet spaces. And as everyone said, don't forget to check our website. The projects are growing, evolving, so there's going to be new things appearing through time on the new Spatial Realities.